prefer audiobooks won't read an ebook or won't read a print book, and if you don't have an audiobook, you simply won't have access to those readers. So in many ways it was important, and I'm glad I had that opportunity to start without having to put a lot of money up front initially.
Brilliant. What obstacles or kind of misconceptions do you think or gaps in your knowledge when you started?
I think the biggest thing I see out there is people fear it's a very complicated process. They think the production itself takes a lot of effort, it's very cumbersome or too much skill from their part. And actually, if you are working with industry professionals, professional narrators and or professional students, or they get their friend to record a bit, but they don't, anyone else that isn't a professional outlet won't know how Audible takes the files, won't know the standards to be met, won't know how to QA and master it correctly. As long as you're working with people who have done this many times before and know what they're doing, it's very straightforward to do. And that was the biggest lesson for me when I started doing it myself, paying for the productions as well, was just how straightforward it was. And now it's actually quite a fun part of the process because I get to go to the studio rather than it being this mountainous thing.
It's a kind of resource, I suppose, that I use to help make the idea stronger or work out where the weaknesses could be and things at that early stage for me.
Yeah, I think very similar. Fayebaum was pitched as Sexy Black Elves to my editor, and she was like, I'll buy it. I have no story. And then I did a package proposal because it was my second trilogy. I had a team around me already, which was amazing. And I just did a proposal, so it was 3 chapters. No plot, but they didn't know that, they bought it. And then I kind of was like, okay, now I have to write this book. But I collaborate a lot with my agent. Some of you might have agents already, but there are some agents that are more editorial and some that aren't. I preferred and looked into a more editorial agent, and she's wonderful, and we collaborate together. And then I have a US editor and a UK editor who work together to do notes, which does mean you get double the amount of notes, but it's still great because editing is actually when the magic happens, the first draft. Honestly, sorry guys if you didn't know that. I didn't really know that going into the industry. No one cares about that first draft. It's all about the editing. And I'd say my first book started
as well. I think the other thing is when you're first starting out, when I do creative writing classes in schools, I always say that first draft is for you. No one else has to see it. It can be as messy, as contradictory, as whatever you like. It's your kind of playground to tell yourself the story first. And I think sometimes people get so het up and kind of like, oh, that opening chapter has to be brilliant, that 10 years later they still just are working on that opening chapter. And it's just be messy with it. It doesn't matter. No one has to see it.
Just get to the end.
Yeah, that's always my top writing tip is I have so many talented writer friends, and the only difference is that they've just not finished. You just have to get to the end because you can't do so many of the steps until you've got to the end of the first draft. So.
I always say that you're actually not a writer until you get to the end. And like up to that point, you're getting there, but you're not actually a writer until you actually type the end, and then the real work begins, as you said in the edit. But the only other thing I would say very quickly is this little lesson that I learned the hard way is an agent is really important, but no agent is better than a bad agent. And I was burned very badly early on in my career by having an agent that wasn't very good and burned a lot of bridges for me. And then luckily I'm friends with brilliant writer Sarah Pimborough, who actually introduced me to my current agent, and it's very difficult because when you get that offer of being represented, you're like, I'm going to jump on it straight away, I need this agent, but yeah, sometimes you need to be careful with that kind of stuff.
That's fantastic advice, actually. And there's so much of the working relationships that we as authors are taking as being chosen, and the sheer relief. So actually remembering that it's a working relationship and you both need to get something out of it is important. We're going to go to questions now. If anyone's got any questions, straight ahead.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, Beth, I'm a huge fan of Flatshare. It's so cool you're here. I didn't know you were on this panel.
Oh, hi.
And so I am writing a romance novel right now called Say Goodbye to Hollywood. And I feel a little funny doing it because like I don't feel like I fit the typology of a romance writer. And so I'm wondering if you guys can just give me some advice. Each of you a piece of advice.
Oh, why don't you feel?
Yeah.
He's Romanian. I don't know if that helps. I'm giving you any advice. Like, what should I look for within myself to fit the genre? Like, what advice would you give to someone? Forget that I don't feel like the typology. What advice would you give to someone writing their first romance? Like, should I pay attention to the trope? You know, you were talking about tropes earlier. I was really interested in that. Should I pay attention to the tropes? What should I focus on? Like, how do I wind my way through it to get to the end so I can be a writer?
Yeah, you will forget the stuff about being male and you're not kind of like, and you're in your 40s and stuff like that. That's irrelevant. But it's amazing, I think, how writers find any excuse to kind of think, I can't do it. That's why writers have the cleanest houses. They're always finding an excuse not to write. And so I think kind of like, I think don't get caught, you know, I said about the first draft, that's for you. Don't get caught up in it. Don't get kind of like stuck with it like that. And almost in a way stop kind of like asking yourself lots of questions about it.
Well, like, how important is genre, is like making sure it's genre specific, or
Have you worry about? Sorry, no, you go.
I was just gonna say, have you got to the end yet?
I've gotten to the end of a first draft.
Great,
Amazing.
amazing.
Okay.
Okay, don't worry too much about genre. Like I said at the beginning, like genre is a marketing, first and foremost, it's a marketing tool. Don't worry about the fact that you don't feel like you fit into the genre readership. I am a black queer woman. If you line up every romance author in the UK, we are few and far between. So I really wouldn't worry about that either. I wouldn't worry about so much about the tropes. Think about how you want to get an agent. Think about the pitch that you're going to write. What makes it different? Don't worry about anything else. Just just care about the book. Don't care about the outside influences. Just, you know, the goal is to get an agent, or the goal is to get a publisher, or to self-publish. Get to those points. Don't worry too much about everything else.
Yeah, and I would try, it's so hard, but I would try not to let those goals into your writing space too much. You know, you can't start doing those steps that you're aiming for until you've got a novel you're really proud of. So put them aside for now. Right now, focus on, that is not where the joy is either. The joy is in the writing and connecting with, what was it when you came up with that idea and you went, oh my God, I have to write this. What gave you that feeling? And just trust that that feeling will connect with someone else. And that's a problem for when you get to that step. Right now, you get to be in the joy of writing. Worry about the rest later.
Okay. Thank you.
Fantastic. Wow. Okay. Over this side. Sorry, I'm running you over that way.
Hi. This is for queer spaces, writing in general. Do you find it more challenging, I guess, to get off the ground as a queer writer and to sort of get into this really challenging industry coming from that perspective? And what advice do you have for other writers that are trying to get in?
Yeah, I think it is trickier because half the problem is that when you're pitching the book to a publisher, they are commercial entities and they may be absolutely passionate about representation and about, especially in the YA area, about especially making lives better for young queer kids in schools and that kind of stuff. And you can only really do that through representation in any medium. But there's a commercial reality to it. So I was talking with my rights agent about The Boy I Love, and it's gay love story set in the trenches. Half the world will not buy that. So Russia won't buy it, China won't buy it, huge markets will not buy it. So actually, and same with my adult crime fiction. Adult crime sells really well in Russia and China, all those kind of places, and they're kind of Agatha Christie style whodunits, so really well. but it's a gay traveller detective. So prejudice on 2 levels is going to limit your market. And I'm really fortunate with my publishers that they will play me the same kind of advance as if it was a straight character. But I do know other stories of other publishers who are like, we won't say that we're not buying it because it's a queer, unapologetically queer main character, but you know what's going on. It is difficult, but there's a lot of and unfortunately, the way the world is going at the moment, it's only going to get harder in those spaces. But that's why we really need a lot of queer people in places of power, so agents and editors and things like that, who will say, we still really need those books. But there's a lot to be optimistic about as well, but it is difficult.
I'll just add very, very quickly, very similarly, all my books have sapphic love stories, and I have had to turn down foreign rights offers that wanted to make them heterosexual, and I also haven't had, for some of my biggest successes like Feybound, I will never have a Russian deal, etc. And that's the choice that I have to make to kind of live my truth, I guess. But I have such a supportive team behind me, and I think that's the main thing. Also, my blackness is a huge barrier in publishing. So yeah, unfortunately, it's not a great answer for you. There are struggles, there are still struggles, but just keep going because we need more of us.
And a big shout out to those publishers operating in countries where it is difficult and they still buy the books. So I had a Polish deal recently, and they bought it specifically because of the draconian policies that the Polish government have put out about what they call family-friendly zones in cities where queer people aren't welcome. So that was a direct reaction to, they liked the book anyway, but they bought it as well to say, we're standing up for our queer readership in this country, which is incredible, and we should really be supporting those publishers.
There are a lot of brilliant things and people out in this industry, so I want to say a big thank you.
Miller for our chat about audiobook self-publishing. So we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to begin with minimum faff. Lee and Michael, please introduce yourselves.
Well, I'm Lee Jarrett. I'm the global head of publisher and partner relations at Audible. I've been there for 12 years now, and I manage our ACX creator relations team. ACX is the Audiobook Creation Exchange, where we are the marketplace that puts indie authors and other creators in touch with narrators and producers to help create audiobooks. And then I also manage our publisher partnerships team, where globally we work with publishers across the world to help get titles into audio.
I'm Michael R. Miller. I'm an epic fantasy writer, and I've been self-publishing audiobooks since 2017 using ACX.
Amazing.
That's the short intro.
I just couldn't stop thinking, I love the fact that are you an epic fantasy writer or you're an epic fantasy writer? But both, I guess. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Molly Flatt. I'm a comment editor at The Bookseller and an author as well. So I thought to start off this chat, it would be really useful to go back to basics and ask Michael, as a self-published author, when did you create your first audiobook and why? Why did you think that was an important thing for you to do? Because, it's hard enough being a self-published author anyway.
Yeah, well, audiobooks is what I grew up on, and they're really important to me. So when I did my first book came out 2015, I wanted an audiobook, obviously, because that would be important to me. When I started, the books took a while to get going, so no one was interested in the audio rights. So it was I would have to do it myself, figure out a way to do it, and I'm stubborn like that. So I initially looked at ACX, and they still have this program where a narrator will do a royalty share model. So you don't have to pay anything up front, and the narrator will split the profits with you 50-50. That's how I started. And then later on, as things took off, I was able to pay for productions and keep the full rights. But really, it was just starting because audio was important to me. And there is a huge segment of the market where listeners, people who I find it fun. And so yes, there is a financial consideration if you are going to pay for the production up front, and that's more the thing to think about and consider, not, oh, it's so difficult. And a lot of people, a lot of other studios will tell you how difficult it is, and therefore they're going to take it off your hands and make life easier. But the truth is, it's not. It's not difficult at all.
Okay. Well, I think we might go back to money in a minute as an indie author. So, like, when do you start thinking about it? Are you thinking about it while you're still writing? Do you've got everything done, every last copy edit done, and then you engage in the process? What's the first email you send? What's the first bit of research you do? Like, what's your workflow for turning a project into an audiobook?
Well, it's different for me now, but if I think about if you're a complete debut and you no other books out, and I think first and foremost, make sure the book is ideal and perfect, and work on that first. Make sure you've got that as good as you can. And then if you have, so if you like audio and you know narrators and you have someone in mind, just start reaching out to them. If you don't know anything about audio, either start researching narrators or ask around other people in your genre and find out which narrators the listeners really take to. All failing that, you can claim your book on ACX. So if you have it published as an ebook on Amazon, you make your ACX account, you can claim, but you want to select the narrator, however that's you doing it or auditioning it on ACX, and the narrator will let you know whether they can do it all themselves or they want to work with a studio team. And if they do, they tend to have
in the way that the platform is set up, what are the decisions you made? How is it set up to keep everyone as happy as possible and balance those different priorities?
Yeah, it's a very interesting balance, and I will say 31% of the books at Audible come from indie authors and ACX. So it is a very large portion of our business. And as a result, it's very important for us to focus on that cohort of creators. As I like to say, creators are also my customers, as well as the customers who are the end user listeners. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about in meetings, well, what does this development in our industry, in our product mean for creators? And does it work for them, and is it right for them? And so that's why you've probably heard about a lot of the developments and advances that happen with Audible and with ACX over the past year that are creator focused. We have launched a new royalty model. We have author suggested list pricing. These are both in beta, but they're going to be going live soon. We have opt-in for all you can listen distribution. We revamped our website for ACX and completely did a redesign of that. We're having new sales metrics and overviews, as well as some other things that we hope to be launching in the near future. So, it's really about what can we do to make creators have more tools so that they can sell more of their audiobooks.
And I know that the platform was launched in 2011,
Yes.
Is that right? And so how has it changed over the years? What changes have you already made, like in response to the industry, and what's shifted in terms of what's on offer for creators, how it's set up?
So there have been a number of things. When we say the platform was launched in 2011, the ACX offering is what was launched in 2011. And so we have made a fair number of changes since then. I mean, the biggest being that new royalty model. And really the new royalty model is important because as we are seeing, as we launch in more and more marketplaces, we are seeing different ways of consumption. Some consumers want to consume titles using that all-you-can-listen model. Other consumers want to listen using the credit model. We've then discovered that, look, there are some consumers who don't want necessarily the benefit of what we refer to as our Premium Plus model, and they want a lower cost model where maybe they don't own the titles and they can listen for a month. That's our standard model, which we're rolling out and testing throughout various territories. And so we're making all these tools available to ACX creators to leverage these new things. These new royalty model will allow them to get into these new marketplaces. Other things that we're really excited about are like Dolby Atmos, being able to increase the sound quality and enjoyment for really these highly produced titles.
Amazing. And I feel on that note, I need to bring in AI briefly. I'm not going to let it take over this chat. How is, if it is, AI used on the platform, and kind of what are your future plans for that in terms of artificial voice or simply facilitating kind of process management, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of exciting developments with AI. When you think of AI, there's search developments what we're doing with Maven, which is our new search tool. But obviously with audio, a lot of people think about text-to-speech, maybe translations. And so this is something we've been thinking about for a long time. Of course, human narration is always going to be core to what we do. But I think about the fact that some estimate in the world there's about 150 million books out there, and we have 1 million in audio. That's a very small portion. And I feel that there are probably a lot of customers who would prefer to listen to many of those books as opposed to reading them. And I wish we were able to provide those books to them. And for many of them, it's just not going to be cost effective to do that using a human narrator. I also personally have dealt with vision problems my whole life, and there was always a risk to my vision as I got older. And I just thought, like, from an accessibility standpoint, I would love for all those books to be in audio. And so we're now working with publishers. If you're here, authors, you want to speak to us about it, you can reach out to us at contentpartners@audible.com. But we're starting to test various things. Already for the ACX community, we have something called the Voice Replica Beta, which allows a narrator to make a clone of their voice. And they can decide, oh, I'm going to go ahead and bid on a title using my voice replica, and the author who is listening to audition would know that, and they can offer that work at a lower price. Because the fact of the matter is, a narrator can't narrate for unlimited hours in a day, but maybe they could do more work after their studio time to produce that book in audio. Our hope, of course, is that this will lead to new listeners and new sales, which will grow the audiobook industry, and then ultimately lead for more human narration and more jobs for narrators, more royalties for authors, and everyone can benefit. So that's just one of the things we're focusing on.
AI, a win-win-win. Michael, what's your take on AI? Would you be up for exploring those kind of voice-cloned AI? Have you looked into it already?
No, for me, at the stage that I'm fortunate to be at, I'll be sticking with the human narrators, partly because, as I mentioned earlier, it's a fun part of the process for me to go to the studio and see it come to life and meet the narrator and have that relationship. And I'm considering, multicast for my next series and things like this. So I see it as something, as Lee says, somewhere that can help accessibility maybe as you're beginning, or as an option, a cheaper option early on. But for where I am, I'll stick with the human narrator, I think.
Yeah, right. Just briefly moving back to money, I know you kind of touched on this already, Michael. So how open are you able to be? How much does it cost you to make an audiobook upfront?
Well, it's going to depend on what your per finished hour quote is. I would say these days, and of course inflation is pushing this up a bit quicker than it was, I would say a $350 to $400 per finished hour is a good benchmark for a really high quality production that doesn't completely break the bank. Now, what does that mean? Per finished hour is, roughly speaking, 10,000 words. So if your book is 100,000 words, that's 10 hours. And so whatever the quote is, that would be 10x that. You can get it cheaper, of course. It can go much more expensive. I just give that as a kind of rough price range. I think if someone is quoting you up in the thousands, that's far too much. You will find people who are starting out, especially on the ACX platform, where they're starting, that can be just as fantastic, but they're just finding their first books and finding their feet, and the fee will be a bit lower. So I would use $350 to $400 per finished hour as a good benchmark. And then you have to see what your book is, how long that will be, and work out the budget from there.
That's really helpful, thank you. And how do your audiobooks sell compared to your print books and your ebooks? And what portion of your revenue stream are they becoming?
Well, in terms of the revenue, because I make a little more money on my audio sales per copy sold than my ebook sales. So I would say audiobooks are about 50%, maybe even a bit more of my total revenue, which is really good, yeah. Which is so it is the most important part of my catalog now, and it means a lot to me. I'm glad, because I say audio's my favorite format. I prefer to listen when I can, and I would so since 2020 sold about 260,000 audiobooks, which is roughly 1.5 million USD.
So that's quite a
That's
big,
very
quite
positive.
quick shift for you in terms of
Yeah, it went,
that being your priority.
nothing. Well, which isn't uncommon. There's very few people come storming out of the gates. If you stick at it, you've got more chances.
And I would just add, I mean, if you think about the level of those sales, 50%, I mean, that's a large part of, sales that other audio authors who are not in audio are probably missing out on. And I'll say, ACX is a great path for great authors like Michael. There are plenty of other really successful authors who started at ACX. So a good example is Mel Robbins. Her first title was at ACX, and now she just released a new title, The Let Them Theory, and that's one of our best-selling titles worldwide. We have other authors like L.J. Ross, who's one of the top 50 UK authors in the past few weeks. Hugh Howey, his Silo series was done via ACX, and now my wife and I enjoy watching it on Apple TV. So, I mean, there are really all types of authors who start, whether you're big or small. It's a good place to get started. And as Michael was saying earlier, it can be really easy to get started given the options that are there and cost effective.
Brilliant. And in terms of reaching these levels of success, how much data do you have in terms of what can load the dice? So the most popular audiobooks on ACX, the most profitable. Are you seeing trends in terms of length or genre preference or narrator or narration? Are you able to, I'm not asking you for the bestseller DNA code thing. I know that's a thing, I'm not sure. It's really rigorous. But yeah, are there any kind of trends that might guide people's decisions when they're creating their audiobooks to help load the dice for success?
So I've got a million stats here. I'm trying to pick out which ones I want to say. I would say, like the book publishing industry, audio is very wide, and we have a lower segment. So really younger listeners are becoming a bigger thing. We've seen the growth in kids content given our launch of kids profiles and the ability now to have a safe space for kids to listen to. Our three top genres right now for the indie community, or just in general, fantasy, don't worry, Michael, we have a 30% growth year over year, so some really strong categories there. I'll also note that 79% of our titles in, I believe, 2024 had listening at Audible. So we're not just engaging with the top titles at Audible, it is really going deep into our catalog. When you think about the fact that we have a million titles, that is probably a very wide breadth of what's available and various areas you can be working in.
Okay. Cutting through the noise, that's always the big question. You've got the nothing, and then you've got the everything. What happens there? And I guess marketing is a big part of it. Michael, how do you market your audiobooks? And what kind of support do you get from ACX? And what do you do elsewhere? Give us a...
Sure, I mean, marketing your book as a whole, you are marketing the audiobook as well, right? So don't need to get too specific in marketing the audio, because you don't want to get so... People sometimes think if you're pushing one format, the others don't exist, which is a bit strange, but they often do think that. I found Facebook ads were very effective for audiobooks back 2020, 21. Then that fell off for me, but everyone's different. It could be there's some low-hanging fruit there, and you can always try that. Nowadays, if I'm being very specific with audiobook marketing, I do YouTube sponsorships, but that's relatively advanced because it costs quite a bit, but you can work up to that. I would say make sure, whenever you're talking about your book, first and foremost, you make sure people know there is an audiobook and show the cover as well as the regular cover, because people, again, will do kind of batches. So you want to give them plenty of warning so that they can save a credit to buy your book, because if they don't have a credit spare, they might forget about you by the time the next book, their next credit comes along. I think that's the best thing. Just make sure you're always mentioning the fact that the audio exists. It sounds quite basic, but a lot of people forget that.
I would add on for those who are beginning, first of all, simultaneous release or as close to the publication date for ebook and print book, having that in audio is really important for getting your book lifted and going strong at the very beginning. Audible has also been launching a number of efforts to help inform the community better. I'm not the expert in marketing, but we have a team that has created ACX University, and we just restarted that learning program. We have a new season, and so you could go and learn more about how to do marketing and social via the ACX team. We also recently relaunched our social channels for ACX, so you'll see a lot of more engagement and action there, and I definitely invite you to go follow them and check them out.
And obviously, audiobooks are international. You don't need kind of, to get into bookshops in other countries. They're right there for everyone. Michael, how big is your kind of international listenership? And do you try and capitalize on that in any way, like grow a kind of international fan base?
Well, when you publish on ACX, you're accessing the .com, the UK, you're accessing every audiobook store across the world, but primarily, of course, the English-speaking ones are going to be where you sell because that's English. The majority of my sales are in the US, in every format, and probably like 90% of them are US-based. I to cater for the US market because I got a lot of feedback on my first series about spelling mistakes when it was in UK.
Where are the Zs?
And yes,
where are the Zs?
In audio, that's not such a big deal because you're not going to see the spelling, but and my covers are a little tilted towards the US market compared to the UK market. So I do make that.
What does that mean? I love that.
Well, in sci-fi fantasy,
They're all white.
Fantasy in the UK, the covers tend to be more kind of graphical and pared back, big titles, graphics. Whereas in the US, they still like a nice illustration, a nice painting. And if you show that same cover, sometimes in the UK, they assume it's for younger people because it's a full-on painting of a character. In the US, they prefer that over just the kind of graphic artwork. So again, given that you only get the one, if you could do multiple different covers, I'd maybe consider, but as you have the one, I push it towards the US audience because that is by far the biggest audience.
Okay.
And it behooves me to sell to the biggest audience.
I love that granular kind of stuff.
I feel like I want to make a joke about Americans here, but my PR team is telling me in my head
God,
right now not to
please do
say
it.
anything.
Come on, Lee. You could do it.
That is really fascinating.
Fascinating. So we've touched a little bit on trends with you, Lee, but and a lot of the chat that I kind of see in our bookseller conferences and on the comment pages about audio innovation. Every week there seems to be a new startup, a new tool, a new platform. There's a lot of chat about innovation, but when it comes down to listening to the audiobooks, generally, it's a person talking to you with, clean sound, saying the words that were in the equivalent book. Michael, have you thought about exploring any different kind of innovations with audio, whether that's, innovations, multicast, that's not exactly an innovation, like, the Archers is multicast special effects. But, have you thought about kind of any ways of doing fancier, different audio than a straight narration?
I think everyone's taste will vary. Some people love big multicast dramas with the sound effects, others don't. I don't love that personally, but I think if you're going to move beyond just a single narrator and add in other things, I think a light touch is good. I've got orchestral music now that comes in at the beginning of the books to help kind of just get you into that sense for the world building and immerse you. I'm thinking about, because this is a very large book with lots of different characters, kind of like your Game of Thrones. So it changes a lot, and when you're reading it, people see a symbol and they're primed. In the audio, there's just like sort of a gap, which is a bit strange. So I'm thinking of adding in some musical cues to let you know that it's changing character perspective, but very light touches, possibly for my next series, multicast, one female narrator, one male narrator for the parts. But that's about all. I think less is more, both in writing and in the production.
Lee, do you see much of that on the platform? Do you kind of see trends, experimentation? Is it very much a case that, the majority that sell are still pretty much one narrator, pared down production?
Yeah, we have various sorts of productions. I would say the majority are your singular dual narrator productions, but we've been experimenting with these multicast productions with full sound design that are really exciting, and that's a lot of what our Audible Originals teams does. So, for instance, 1984, we had Andrew Garfield star in that. along with a beautiful cast, and they just did an amazing production. Right now, we're also working on new editions of Harry Potter with the Pottermore team, and really excited about that. I am concerned that I'm probably going to have to drive around town for hours on end with my kids, who are going to be absolutely obsessed with it. But that's a really exciting production we're working on. And working with the Dolby Atmos team, we're integrating new technologies to make sure that listeners are having the best possible experiences. But as Michael said, I think it is very particular to the title. There are some titles where definitely the better move is to have a single or dual narration with a light touch, because that's what the title calls for. For our Audible originals, we are often writing those things to the form so that we can integrate that sound effects and music into it. Of course, that's not the only title where that's appropriate, but it's one where we felt it has worked for both the creators and the customers.
And actually on that, Michael, have you ever thought about, I mean, I know all your books are an book.
I spoke to my narrator and the studio team about this, but saying, should we adapt the book into slightly more of a script so that it maybe works? And they say no, just because the words are the words. And I've noticed some studios, Sound Booth do this, they do adapt it into a script. Where you take out some of the descriptor sounds, like "she said angrily," for example, and the actor's just supposed to say it like that. But I'm not going to do it. I think keeping it out, the book is the book, and also there are people that like to use WhisperSync on Amazon and follow along, read along, so that would muck around with that a bit too much. So I think I'll keep it saying an audio original, like specific, like Lee's talking about. I suppose I would consider it if an opportunity came along, but that's a very different thing than writing the core mainline books that I have in the series.
The message I'm hearing is that Lee's team should commission you to write an Audible original. I'm just saying, that's what I heard. I'm very aware that I think we're basically out of time. Sorry about the questions. You're probably getting this every time. Don't go, because there's going to be one final thing. One piece of advice. Actually, do you know what? I'm going to ask you two final things. Number one, your top piece of advice for independent authors looking to break into audio, and recommend the last great audiobook you listened to. Cannot be Michael's, sadly, although those are epic in all ways. Do go and listen. So, Lee, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I mean, our biggest thing is that getting into audio can be a very easy thing. ACX really lays out all the tools for you. So whether you're concerned about cost or you're just concerned about not knowing how to do it, we make it very easy on both fronts. So please come check us out. We're over in the booth over there. I don't want to say the number because I'll get it wrong, but we're over in the booth, so come talk to us. In fact, our creator product team is here, and they're here eager to hear about what your experience working with ACX is and whether you have any questions, because we're taking that feedback back to our teams to help build things. So, and then in terms of the most recent thing I listened to, well, like I said, I listened in the car with my kids a lot. They love audiobooks. So I listened to Viva Durant and the Masquerade Ball. It's a title by Saint Armand. I forgot her first name, but that's her last name. It is an Audible original, and it takes place in Mardi Gras in New Orleans, where then we followed up with a trip down to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. My kids had an amazing time, so it was really special to connect the audiobook to the real world thing.
Hi.
One piece of advice, I mentioned it earlier, but don't be afraid to reach out to your dream narrator. Don't assume they won't listen to what you have to say or take you on. The narrator of my series also narrated The Witcher, which is obviously a very big fantasy project, and I assumed, he'll say no, and he said yes. And it's been huge for me because when the TV show was still running, I got a little bit of splash off of that. So it can be very helpful. Don't be afraid. Just shoot for the stars. Try and get your favorite. Recommendation on audio. I just finished listening to the Guards books in the Terry Pratchett and Discworld, all 8 of them, narrated by John Coleshaw, and they are all absolutely brilliant. So I couldn't recommend them more.
Amazing. And I think, Michael, you are going to hang around the Audible stand.
Yes, I'll be in the Audible
as well
if you want to.
So I'm going to excuse myself for not leaving time for questions, because they will be made available to you at the Audible stand. Thank you so much for listening.
Comics were always just so easily accessible and crucially so easy to copy. See, when I wasn't reading comics, I was making them. I would trace the characters off the pages, learning which bits to draw where, how to pose the limbs to convey a mood, how to create whole personalities with just a couple of flicks of the pencil. And then I would take what I'd learned and I'd make my own characters, my own comics, my own books. My love of reading comics and creating comics began to become the same thing. I just loved comics. And I was sure that if I could find a way to do it as a career, then I would. The thing is, as I became a teen and then a young adult, the comic industry in this country was dwindling. One by one, the titles I'd grown up reading started to merge, then disappear completely. By the 80s and the 90s, there were no longer the rich pickings to be found on newsagent shelves that I'd been spoilt with. Comics, and I mean real comics, filled with page after page of original content, week in and week out, were replaced by magazines. They gave away cheap plastic gifts on their covers, their pages filled with articles about TV shows or toys, complete with big glossy photos. They might have one or two token comic strips, but those soon became unaffordable for the editors to justify, and so they disappeared too. Despite this, I spent a disproportionate amount of time making my own comics and sending copies of them out to every publisher I could think of. And yet there were barely any comic publishers left. I remember the editor of Deadline, the alt culture mainstay which heralded the iconic Tank Girl amongst others, sending my work back with a post-it note stuck to it, saying the words, essentially, nice work, but the comic industry is dead. Before the internet took full swing, finding a place to put your comics was a ghost town. Cost was always part of the problem. It was far easier to fill a page with ready-made assets than it was to commission an artist and a writer to come up with fresh comic material. As such, children growing up in the UK through the 90s and early 2000s barely saw any comics. A whole generation of potential comic readers wiped out and lost. And that generation is now growing up into the adults, the parents, many of them taking their own children to the bookstore, allowing them to choose a book. And if the child chooses a comic, some of them might say, not that one, a proper book. A proper book. I cannot tell you how much those words chill through the hearts of everyone working in comics today. Britain once had an incredible tradition of cartoons and comics. Comics were respected, admired, upheld as a fine art. But in those few decades where we lost it, it's been a steep climb to claw our way back, to convince the popular culture that we are proper books. The few comic titles who survived those wilderness years, such as the Beano, the DFC, and then the Phoenix, did so through grit, perseverance, and I'm sure quite considerable cost. But they did so because they believed, they knew that children love comics. I cannot say this enough. Children absolutely flipping love comics. But they have to be shown them in the first place. They have to know they exist. Thanks to those few publishing outliers, along with the determination of comic creators to stick to their guns, to keep telling the stories that they want to tell, we are finally starting to see a resurgence. children's comics are having their day. Their renaissance. Children's comics are storming through the industry and winning huge, huge audiences. And this need not be the peak, this should only be the start. Britain has so many amazing comic artists and writers who have so many wonderful stories ready to be told. It's exciting to think how many incredible comics there are yet to be made. But it's important to recognise that comic books aren't just children's books. They can't be treated in the same way. They need publishers and editors who really understand comics, why comics work the way they do, the mechanics, the underneath, how to trust the creators to know how to tell their stories, how to support them not just with one book, but 2 or 3, let the characters grow, how to market the comics, how to get kids engaged with comics. Understanding why kids love and connect with comics is a cultural thing, it's a societal thing, it's a human thing, it's an instinct. As AI creeps into the children's comic space, as it is and as it will only ever be able to replicate what's come before. It won't ever speak from the heart. Humans speak from the heart. It's where all art comes from. It's how we see ourselves represented in each other's stories. And now, more than ever, children's comics need to be even more representative. As once free-speaking democracies appear to be silencing their diverse voices, we need to be amplifying them. We show the world who we are through our stories. As authors, we should be sharing tolerance, compassion, grace, and above all, a profound common sense for children to carry around with them. And we can do all this through comics. We have a really special chance here to reach readers that we've missed before. Last summer, I was stood nervously waiting in the wings of the new theatre in Oxford. I was there as part of the Phoenix Fest, an annual comic making festival run by the Phoenix Comic, where children come along and meet their favourite creators and join in with a range of comic making workshops. And as I was being introduced, I peeked out to the crowd. Well over 1,000 kids, all of them with paper on their laps, pens and pencils in their hands, chattering and yelling and waiting for me to come on stage. And when I went out there, I was greeted like a rock star. And it's not just me either. Neil Cameron got the same response when he went on earlier. The same response all the other amazing Phoenix artists got when they piled on stage to compete against each other in super fun and ridiculous draw-offs. The kids went crazy. For my show, I spent a solid hour demonstrating to everyone there how I draw my characters, then how to make comics with those characters. Everyone in the audience drew along. By the end, we'd made comics together. They were buzzing from the experience. I was buzzing from the experience. The reason this is important is because that audience of children had all joined in. And they had joined in because I'd taken the time to show them how easy it was to draw my characters. No pretense, no magic, no secret sauce. Bunny and Monkey, the 2 heroes of my books, broken down into very simple, basic shapes that anyone could copy. It's like lifting a veil, breaking a song down into its notes. When a child sees that the things their favourite comic artist is drawing, they can draw too, it can be a game changer. It opens up a whole world of storytelling. A child inspired by comics can start drawing the characters, then start drawing their own characters, then making their own comics, and then making their own books, and the cycle continues. The best-selling comic creators of the future, inspired by seeing how easy it is to start telling their own stories. This is how we rebuild a comic-making tradition we can be proud of. This is how we make Britain a world leader in children's comics. We inspire and we create and we ride this resurgence out beyond just being a trend into a genuine cultural phenomenon, igniting not just a love for reading, but a love for creating, allowing both those things to merge together into one great big love for stories. I was invited here as the creator of the fair, so it would be very remiss of me if you all went away from this talk just remembering it as a beardy man wagging on about comics for about 10 minutes. Far better, I think, that I show you what I've been talking about. With that in mind, I'd love it, if you're willing, if everyone here could take out their paper and their pens and their pencils, or their tablets, whatever you need, and I'm going to show you exactly what I show the children at the workshops. How to draw the 2 main characters from my Bunny vs. Monkey series, Bunny and Monkey. And I want you to see how simple they are, how easy they are to draw, how we could be unlocking this ability in every child in the country. whether they're voracious readers or reluctant readers or anything in between. Hopefully I can show you how comics and cartoons are accessible to absolutely everyone. So let's get started. Right, I will show you first how to draw Bunny.
Right, so yes, as Jamie says, we'd love it if you'd all joined in and joined along. All the children do, as he pointed out at the events he did, so of course everyone here is going to. And while Jamie's drawing, I'm going to ask him some questions, some things that, I'll move over here, that you might be interested in hearing, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A session at the end. And for that you need to put your hands up and a mic will go around, and then we'll hopefully in an equal way pick people to ask questions. Right, Jamie, take us away.
So the most important thing I tell kids every single time is that I work with incredibly simple shapes that anyone can draw, and then you just start adding details to those shapes. So I'm going to work in pencil first, and then I'm just going to go around it a bit in pen. But Bunny and Monkey, I always start with the heads, and the heads are either a square or a circle. So I'll start with Bunny first. Bunny's head is a square, but it's kind of like a rounded square, like an old-fashioned TV screen, if anyone's of the age to remember those. It's kind of, the lines bulge and the corners bulge slightly. So it's a square, but it's a round square, if it were. And then on top of that, Bunny has two huge pillowy ears, which are heart shapes. So I would then draw basically a heart shape there on top of the square, and another one just tucked behind there. So that's his basic head. We would then put a face on him, which is two vertical lines for eyes, a little triangle for a nose, and then whatever type of mouth you want to do, I'll just do a simple smiling mouth. So that is his head and his face, but you can then add little frilly details around it just to give him a little more personality. So I would add eyebrows perhaps up here, quite high above the eyes. I would add a little tuft of cheek fur at one side, like that. And then of course I need to add a body, and the body, I mean, it's hard to describe the shape, but it's kind of just a lump. You draw a lump underneath his head, a bit like a shark's fin maybe. And then arms and legs and things like that always tend to be sausage shapes or circles. So an arm would come out like that, one sausage, two sausage, and then you could just add little fingers to it, like that. And he has this circle on his belly, which is belly fur, I guess, which goes like that. And then the last thing I would do is add a shadow underneath him, which is basically just a squiggle, but it just helps ground the character so you can see that he's standing on something.
Shall we, while people make sure they're caught up, ask you a few questions, Jamie. So just going back to what you said at the beginning of your talk, can you just take us back to your childhood? Are there any memories of drawing that you remember, any particular moments where it really landed for you and it really felt like something you wanted to do more of?
The first time I started making comics in what felt like an industrial scale, I used to read a lot of Garfield comics, and me and my friend used to put tracing paper on them and trace the Garfield poses. And then, you know, when you flip tracing paper over and you rub the back of it, and so it prints it onto another page, and then that way we found we could make our own comics by posing these characters in there. So that was a really great way that we started to really produce issues 1, 2, 3, 4, and start feeling like we were a publisher, essentially, of our own comics.
Did you start actually making comics almost right from the very beginning? It wasn't just drawing; it was actually making comics.
I think it's. I think every child starts drawing cartoons. A lot of it depends on how much encouragement they'll get from their parents or how much they enjoy it. Or I got a lot of encouragement from my parents, and I think as soon as I then discovered comics, it was like, all right, these things I'm drawing, I could put into a story. I could start to make them sequential and take them places. So I think it gradually evolves as you see, and then you realise that you can do the same as the things you're reading. The artists you admire, you can do the same as them, and that unlocks a lot, I think.
And how did that progress when you were at school? What was the reception to your drawing like through school, from art teachers and things like that? Was it similarly encouraging, or did you have a different?
I mean, at school, if you draw a lot of cartoons at school, you normally get told to stop drawing cartoons because you should be concentrating. my first ever commission when I was 15, I think, to do a cartoon for a friend's company. I went and told my art teacher, and he looked down his nose and he went, "Oh, cartoons aren't proper art." And that stuck with me for the rest of my life. So, if you're out there, Mr. Carrick, hello, I'm on stage at the London Book Fair. But no, things like that, little moments like that, I find really helpful because they spur you on, and you're like, well, no, they are, so I'm going to prove you wrong.
Well, it's obviously work. I think something you know, if there's illustrators, whether you're published or aspiring in the audience, something that you should know about Jamie is he's not just very talented, he's an insanely hard worker. He is so disciplined and incredibly prolific because he works so ridiculously hard. And not only has he been working for 20 years, he's been working insanely hard for those 20 years.
I thought you were going to say he's also very spiteful. He just holds
He's
the grudge.
actually successful. So we all good with Bunny. Hope everyone's. Maybe, I'm not going to pick on anyone when I get to look at it, but
Yeah, so that's a bunny. So I hope that looks quite easy to do, and then as you can see, as you start to add the ink lines around it, you start to lose the basic shapes, and it becomes more of a character. It becomes more full-bodied. So that's always lovely to see when we have kids in the audience, and then you see theirs at the end of the show, and they've drawn what you've drawn, and it's amazing. It's
when Jamie does his shows, you ever have the chance to go and see him with a group of kids. It's fantastic. They're so into it. It's just so wonderful to see, and you can see how on one level there's a lifetime of drawing skill there, but it's also really simple enough for someone to actually do it.
Yeah.
But Jamie, what is it about comics you think kids like so much that they're so drawn to them?
I think they're just very, very immediate, so you can see what type of comic it is straight away. You know, when you pick up a book, you have to read a few paragraphs to start to get the vibe for it. But with a comic, it's just, all right, okay, this is my sort of thing, or this is not my sort of thing, and you can just jump straight in. It's the spontaneity. And I think with Bunny vs. Monkey, because I have an incredibly short attention span, I can only work in little chapters, and then we compile all the chapters into one long book. But I think kids really respond to that, because they might have short attention spans, so it's easy for them to then dip in and out of a comic than it would be of other types of book. Yeah. So I go Monkey.
I think Monkey, yeah.
Thank you. So Monkey, whereas Bunny had a square-shaped head like this, Monkey has a round head, basically a circle. Now circles are notoriously quite hard to draw on first go, but that's roughly a circle. So that's Monkey's head. And now Monkey has like a mohawk haircut, which is basically 3 squares stuck together like that on top of a circle. So you could just draw them as squares if that's easier. But that's his haircut, which is always hard to draw from the front. I didn't think it through when I designed him as a character. I can draw him from the side as many times as you want, but not from the front. He has a little triangle there at the top of his head, and a little triangle there at the side of his head. That's just his fur again, and his sideburns essentially. He has big ears either side, which are circles. So you just draw a circle there and a circle there. And then inside that circle you would just draw kind of like a Y shape, just a fold inside the ear. And again we would then put a face on him, so it's the same face essentially as Bunny. Every character in Bunny vs. Monkey has the same face, it's just the body and the head that changes. Although Monkey does have thicker eyebrows, so you could add, and these are kind of like triangles again, you could add eyebrows like that. Because Monkey is the anti-hero, he's the villain, so we want him to look mischievous. He has a nose like this, which is kind of like a flattened U shape, just a little bump. And then his mouth, you can draw any sort of mouth for him. I think maybe I would draw a cheek there and a cheek there, put a line between them, and then you've got some teeth sticking down like that, like he's thinking about some sort of devious plan. And then again, his body, very similar to Bunny, same lumpy body underneath, same sausage arms. Let's have him with his hands on his hips this time. Like that. He has a little cuff where his fur ends and his hands begin there, and then we would just add, well, fingers essentially to the end of his arms. He too has a circle on the front of his chest, on his belly rather, and he has a long windy tail like that, and then a shadow again underneath him. So that is Monkey. And again, at the point I just want to really hammer home, square head, circle head, and every single character in Bunny vs. Monkey works to that principle. They all either have a square head or a circle head, and if you can draw a square or a circle, you can essentially draw Bunny vs. Monkey.
So when you invented those characters, Jamie, did you have to develop them much? Did they just pop into your head straight away? Did you have different versions of them? How did they come about?
I always really want a really cool origin story for this, but I genuinely don't have one. I just thought, oh, a bunny and a monkey fighting in the woods, that would be kind of funny. And then all the characters just kind of filled in around them. And it doesn't always work like that. I don't want to make out like I'm really blasé, oh, it's easy. It's not always that easy, but sometimes inspiration just kind of lands in the right place, and it all falls into place at the same time.
And as time's gone by and you've been out in the world a bit more, you've been to schools a lot more, can you just talk a bit about the reception to comics, how it might have changed? So I remember when we worked on the DFC together, going to events, and there being quite a lot of snobbery from teachers and parents. They were very suspicious of comics. Can you just talk about that a little bit and your experience of that?
I think that, like I said in my speech, I think the popular culture in the UK, a large part of it still doesn't understand comics and still thinks, oh, it's manga and it's superheroes and that's it, and it's clearly not. But that takes time, and that is changing over time. And the more children you talk to, the more you can see they're reading Dogman or Bunny vs. Monkey, or they understand humorous comics, silly comics. They get it now, and it's just like I said, it's showing them comics and then seeing their faces light up, and then instantly you've got a comic reader for the rest of their lives. Yeah, it's changing. It's really changing now, and kids are really hyped about comics, which is lovely.
Yeah. And sort of UK comics specifically, do you think there's unique things about UK comics? And if they are, what do you think those things are?
I think I don't want to blow our trumpet, but the UK genuinely has one of the best senses of humour in the world. I think our sense of humour is incredible. It's so deadpan and dry and surreal, and I don't think we exploit that, and especially with children's literature in any way. I don't think we do enough with it. I think children's comics is somewhere where it gets a lot more anarchic and a lot crazier, and we really lean into that British sense of absurdity. So as for the artists, British artists have their own styles and everything, but I think the humour in children's comics over here is unique, and I think it should be exported around the world. Yeah, definitely.
Do you think that the sort of anthology comic is relatively unique to the UK? There are many, I can give a few examples, but there are many other examples of these, like the Beano and the Dandy and the Phoenix, things that like this kind of mix of stories that kind of arrive on a weekly basis.
I think it's the perfect format for introducing kids into comics, because if you read a Phoenix or anything, if you like one strip, you might not like the next, and that's fine. You can pick and choose what you're enjoying. I think we have this really long history, hundreds of years history back to the Beano and every comic that's come since, and I think we did just lose that. We lost sight of it, and a whole generation of kids who then became adults completely forgot about comics and just think, oh, Desperate Dan, Dennis the Menace, and you're thinking, no, there's a lot more going on than what you're remembering from your childhood. So yeah, I think weekly comics, like we're doing with the Phoenix, are vitally important, because it shows kids what's out there.
Do you have any advice for anyone who's either wanting to make their own comic book, or an illustrator who's interested in trying comics? Are there any things that you would say to them to help them think about that, or to watch out for?
I think when you're talking to very young comic creators, the advice always is just keep making comics. And that sounds a bit trite. What's your advice? Just make comics. But it's true. The only way you get good at making comics, or you get to know what your style is going to be, is by just keeping doing it. The amazing thing about any sort of creativity is that you're doing it because you love it anyway, because you're passionate about it, and that's why you keep doing it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the easier it is to transfer your ideas to a sheet of paper. And so you just keep doing it naturally. I think for older artists who are already, kind of dead set that they want to be comic artists, the important thing is having enough ideas of your own, of having all these stories and comics that you want to share with the world, of your own that are important to you. You can take on work, drawing other people's ideas, absolutely, that's fine. But it's so important to have your own characters and your own stories, because that's what publishers really respond to, because they see that you've thought about this a lot and that you know inside and out your work and that you know what you're doing with it.
What about publishers? Obviously, lots of the publishers now started graphic novelists, which is fantastic to see, and that means they're meeting more creators and commissioning more work. Like, is there anything you think they should think about, and things that they need to be aware of or consider in that now they're starting to think about making more comic books?
I think I touched on it in my speech a little bit. It's wonderful that so many more comics are coming out. But comics need to be understood, that they aren't just picture books or children's books. They have a mechanic. They have a way of working. I've read a lot of children's comics where you'll just get page and page of dialogue, characters just speaking to each other, and you think, well, no, there needs to be more than this. You need editors to step in and say, well, maybe they could be talking while they're doing something, or you have maybe up 200 or more pages to fill. You have to know how to fill that with a comic, and that's hard. And that's hard even for me, who's been drawing comics a long time. If I try and draw a 200-page comic book, it's hard to get the story to fill that space and still be interesting. Far easier for me with Bunny vs. Monkey. I just break it down into little nuggets and put them all together, and that's easier for me to write. So yeah, I think publishers need to understand that you can't just put out comics as is. You need to know how comics work and why they work.
And what's the best way of them doing that, do you think? Is it?
Oh, I don't know. That's up to them.
Reading comics.
I put together a few anthologies before, and now when I do anthologies, I work with comic artists. But I did once do one with just artists that I thought were amazing, like street artists and people. I said, "Do you want to do comics?" And they all sent their work in it, and it was great. But you could really tell that some people understood how to do a comic, and some people really didn't. And so the art was lovely, but the story wasn't working, or the story was working, but the art wasn't. And it's finding that balance and finding that, you know when a comic artist knows what they're doing. I mean, you of all people would understand that.
Yeah, because it's I'm supposed to, because it's a different medium and it has a different grammar, a different language that you do have to know.
Yeah.
And if you know it, you can use it in new and creative ways that you can't otherwise do it.
And there's a lot of space to fill, right? In a book, in a 200-page book, there's a lot of space because each page might have 6 to 9 panels on it. You've got to fill each of those panels and then do that 200 times. I mean, that's a knack to get it right.
So out of the things that make comics unique as a medium, are there any features to comics that you particularly think that you like the best in terms of storytelling? Like what are the tools of making comics that you enjoy in your own making? I mean things like sound effects, things that you can use.
Yeah.
To, like tell the story.
What I like most about comics and what drew me to it, I think, when I was younger, is that as the creator, you show everything. You're the art director, you're the storyboarder, you're the background artist, you're the dialogue coach, you're every single role that a film might have or anything else, you have to do, and you have to fit it into a little box like that, and then you have to do it again in the next box, and again and you have to progress this story through. But you get to show people exactly how you see this story in your head. And that's a very unique art form, I think. That's a very distinct way of telling a story, because you know that that's come from the creator, that's really come from their heart. That's everything that the creator understands about the world. It's down there in that page. So that's why
I think also what I really love, which really fits with that, is a lot of the time in storytelling comics, a lot of the stuff that's important that's happening is happening in between panels as you move between them. And it's knowing what not to put in the panel to leave in the gap between the panels that's part of the skill of a comic artist. And you work with some brilliant people who can do that very well. I think we've got 10 minutes for some questions. So if you've got questions for Jamie, we'll go like section by section. So if you want to put your hand up, but then I think there's going to be some mics coming around. So should we start in the middle? This gentleman here shot his hand up quite quickly. Do you wanna go?
When you talk about the Beano and those old comics, are there any methods that you found with a generation that have grown up with the iPhone, the storytelling, has it had to change in any way visually with your comics?
I don't know. I don't think so. I worked on the Dandy for about 10 years, and there was a point where the Dandy closed its doors, and they tried to transfer to motion comics, so on the iPads and tablets. And we were all commissioned to
on coasters or something, so nothing to do with the publishing world, but we loved her style, visual style, and we felt it really represent our title. And it was brilliant, and she worked with us, and now she's got a published, some work published. So yeah, it can come from anywhere. That was felt so exciting to get a book inquiry. I know. I think a lot of illustrators don't feel that they can necessarily put their work forward for publishing books as well. That they feel like they have to be in a certain sphere or a certain level of illustrator to do that. And I'd want to make that clear. That's not the case at all. I think if you're professional and you are consistent and you are, good with your time and you make sure that you deliver, it's fine.
I think my favourite find was I was at my mum's house up north watching Coronation Street and pyjamas, as you do, and the adverts came on and it was the TSB advert, and I went, wow, that's a really good illustration. This went on for a while and I just kept thinking about it. I thought, who is that?
Yeah.
And then I found out, and it ended up an illustrator, an author who we work with now called Steve Small. But back then, I had to find him. He wasn't available really on social media. Yeah. He's an animator by trade, and so I had to do a bit of investigating. And I just went, it's just this one image that I saw was just spot on.
Yeah.
Anyway, after a bit of digging, a bit of, like I said, being nosy. We tracked him down, and he wanted to come in to meet us, and it just so happened at the time that Helen, my publisher, had this fantastic text, and we paired them together, and now he's got a really successful publishing career he's also a creative director of a big animation company, but we can push that to one side. He's now a very successful author illustrator, Steve Small, who's done I'm Sticking With You and all sorts of books for us. So his career has been one of the, we talk about it quite a lot, and I always laugh when I always think, I thank my mum for that.
I think it's a good point about discoverability.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating when you see something, you think, oh my God, that's amazing. I really want to work with you.
No matter what the project is, if you can, trying to push with that question to get a credit for it.
Yeah.
You never know who's watching Curry.
In the pyjamas.
How about you, Samuel? Have you got any kind of illustrator stories that come to mind?
So yeah, mine would be discovering Mark Bradley on Twitter, which I only saw, I think, as as I said earlier, another illustrator I followed and reposted his Bug Box webcomic. And at the time, we've been having those editorial meetings to discuss about how we needed to find more young illustrated fiction, because the sort of success of things such like Dogman and Bunny versus Monkey, we went, how do we get a slice of that pie? And this webcomic came up, and there were just 4 panels of these 2 little creatures that were adorable, and they just tapped into kind of emotional literacy, and it was just the sweetest thing. Like, what is this? We sort of found a bit of a hole, presented it at a meeting, and Mark, we just published book 5 of Bumble and Snug, and he previously worked in the probation service. He's completely self-taught, but he is a massive advocate for graphic novels, but also emotional literacy, because he saw how important having an understanding of your emotions is whilst he worked in the probation service. So he came in, we had a creative meeting between myself and our editorial director, and kind of developed the idea into something that we could take to our acquisitions meeting, and it's kind of just gone from strength to strength from there. His visual language has changed, the way that he creates the artwork is completely different, but it was just really nice that it was his passion that drives through. Every conversation we have with him, you can tell how invested he is, and he didn't think that was a possibility. It was only, I think, this might be misguided advice, but it's only in the last year, I think he quit his day job so he could focus purely on it, because of just how what he was doing. So I realise it's not a luxury that everybody has, but it's the fact that he's been able to churn that around. And every conversation, I've learned so much from him, because he's such a massive comic book nerd and just so invested in what what he's doing, but it's just that joy of stumbling across something small and think, what can I do with that? Is that what I'm looking for? And then when they come in and this world just unfolds in front of you.
It's been so exciting to be part of his journey.
And it's so nice, like we're talking about new things with him, and again, it's just kind of watching that unravel from a different place and just seeing how he's completely different. And I think the joy of what we do is that so much of it is a natural ability or a passion, that it can be self-taught, even from the design side as well as the illustration side, that it feels so accessible to everybody. And I think that is what's really wonderful, is because you just immediately get a different perspective. You don't have to follow the same path as everybody else. Like I say, you can design a mushroom coaster and still find yourself here.
Exactly. And that leads me in quite nicely as well, Chair. I'm sure we have a good amount of illustrators in the audience today who have their own ideas for picture books or illustrated non-fiction books that they are keen to get in front of art directors. And it would be great to know from you guys how you would typically like to receive a pitch for a book, and maybe what route that would typically come through, and what's easiest for you to get a green light on.
Made me feel that he was something special was just how he did this one illustration of a little girl looking up with a bunch of flowers, and how he illustrated the head pose, how he illustrated the arm. Every little bit of detail was observing children, humans out there. He had sketchbooks and sketchbooks and sketchbooks, just of different poses that he crafted. He knew how children reacted to things. What do you like? You know, I always call it the 4-second rule. If you're buying shoes, clothes, food, anything, it's like, what's your initial thing? So actually getting publishers to sit, and going back to your question of pitches, but we see them in all sorts of shape and form, and it's not, you don't have to send in a full pitch. I would say do not complete something fully. I'd send in an idea. It is a little character sketch. If you're an author, I know we're not doing authors today, but it is an idea, and you will be always working with a brilliant editor who will be able to help you form that. We also, pitches wise, we do get established authors and illustrators that come in, and then publishers want that one nugget that they think's brilliant. So you find a lot of publishers going for one certain thing, but there's no one way that I don't think that a pitch is found. But what I would say is do not send it in fully formed.
No.
That helps.
I would completely echo that, but also I think do your research. Do your research on the publishers. What do they actually publish, and how does your illustration fit into what was currently out there? And then send something in. Just say, look, I do this. You know, there's a brilliant illustrator from the States that we've worked with who does these really fine line drawings of plants. And they're beautiful, and you kind of think, oh my god, that would be amazing in a book. So don't do a whole pitch, but then make sure you're approaching the right people for your style, I think, and then send some examples in. How might it look on a page? How might it work? You know, even sometimes we get illustrators sending contents lists in as well, like how they could envisage a book. I think that's fine. For me, I would then pass everything on to our acquisitions editors, who kind of then take the lead on that. But from a visual perspective, I can certainly say if I can see something working. So yeah, that's a really good point. So kind of giving us some impression of what it might look like on the page without sending over a full, complete design dummy.
Stay true to your own voice as well.
Yeah.
It's so important. If you are an author and an illustrator, you know, really, really stay to your own voice there, because that's what will separate you from everybody else.
Yeah.
There's only one of you.
Leads really nicely into my next question as well, Jane. So, what are your guys' thoughts on both illustration and publishing trends that we see? So, either styles that are really popular or topics of books that are really popular. Is there anything you're really seeing at the moment? And do you think illustrators should take that into account when they're kind of developing their own portfolios?
I mean,
I'll go in.
I think I don't necessarily see a trend per se. I think because the market's so broad and there's so many different avenues you could go down, I don't think you should necessarily follow something that doesn't feel authentic to you. From the list that I work across, I think we're seeing a bit more of an ask for less serious, more funny books. I think, you know, there's enough doom and gloom going on. I don't think we need it in our publishing. and especially for this kind of younger ends, and also think about how graphic novels are taking off. No, that is a wrong-term phrase. They are much more popular than they had ever been, but also with reading ages coming down and making books more accessible, like the illustrations are carrying so much more weight in that terms of storytelling. So I think if that's a way that you want to work in, that's something we're all kind of crying out for, which is being funny, being accessible. And if you have an understanding of the market that you want to sit in, it's really helpful. Like if you work in a really high-end, there's characters in, and also how do they align with a readership, again, in children's space that is very screen-led, it's very digital, very animated. Like how do we drag somebody away from that with your artwork is kind of the biggest challenge we have.
I think funny is definitely, I mean, from Bologna Book Fair, the reality of it last year, and I remember, I don't think my rights director's here, thank goodness, but she came back and went, Jane, I want funny in a Belgian accent, I will not do that. She said, we want funny, we really, really want funny. And that isn't because we were doing the over emotional thing or anything, but I think we've been through, as everybody can say, we've been through hard times, and there's been difficult times out there, and I think that they were crying out for a little bit more humour. There's a lot of stories with messages and things like that, which you can overdo with thinking about my audience is 0 to 5, you know, so at the end of the day, saying that we want more humorous books, brilliant, fantastic. But then, you know, there's always going to be the Benji Davises as well, that, you know, that have got a beautiful story that carry through as well. A full story is what I like to call them, you know, really strong beginning, middle and end, being able to illustrate that. But yeah, I'd say go back to the cracker joke and work on your comedy and your funny little sketches. And I think that's probably, you know, people are crying out for that, I think, at the moment.
Quite interesting to hear there's that pendulum in publishing. It's getting really emotional and serious, and then people need a little breather.
Two books on one end and actual bedtime stories on the other.
Yep.
And there's a balance though, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say trends in adult publishing, you know, got to remember trends come and go as well. So if you start following a trend, you're going to end up having to go a different way and go a different way, and then your portfolio becomes muddled. You don't have your own identity. So I think, you know, and what we've been saying all the way through this discussion is about being true to yourself and making sure that you're representing what's within you. I think is important. You need to be setting the trend, not following one. I feel so.
Absolutely, I think that's the way to go. I think that was a really great point from you, I think, Samuel, as well, about not focusing too much on the trends, but also taking the time to research kind of market opportunities and seeing if there's something that kind of sparks an excitement in you from that. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then hopefully I think we've got a bit of time to open it up to the audience, but I'm just going to sneak one more in from me. Do you guys have any advice for the illustrators here today on how they can make the most of the fair and take the most value away from today or tomorrow if they're staying on?
I think go and look at the competitors, wherever you want to be. Look on Amazon and then just see how that translates into the books that you're looking at in a bookstore, and just, you know, styles start to come together. Look for illustrators that you think are working, look at titles that you'd like to, you know, I don't know, you think, oh, that'd be interesting, oh, I like that style. Just take note of different publishers and just familiarise yourself, and yes, drop your cards off where you can, and hopefully that'll get through to the right people.
I think the bookshop element is really interesting because it can sometimes be a step that's missed out. I remember once going back to my old university and speaking to third-year students, and they were doing the Templar Prize, and I asked them, like, well, what books are you referencing? Have you been to a bookshop? No.
Yeah.
And it was really bizarre just to see that gap and just think, you can go into a bookstore and go into a library and just look around, see what catches your eye, and don't work in a vacuum. Like, there's so much out there that can feed into it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be books, but you're at a book fair, so I'm assuming you want to illustrate the books. Go and see what is out there to kind of feed in, and remember those reference points, and how would your work sit in those different parts of the market. Like, yes, being the publisher, we would have to think about who the consumer is and what area of the market that's going to go into, but also in your personal work, are you redesigning a book cover in your artwork? If you're doing that, why does it look that way? What are you trying to do different with it? And just kind of make sure you're feeding the beast of your own creativity.
I think what's interesting as well is, I don't know, this sounds a bit poncy, but going into, you know, if you go to your local museum or whatever, and places where kids can sit down and pick up books. And then, this might sound weird, but looking at what those children are reading is so important, especially what I do. Obviously, parents are buying the book, this, that, and the other, but what are those kids sitting there holding mesmerised by. And that's really interesting when you go into, you know, these certain bookstores, you know, galleries, wherever, where they've got little corners where they sat down picking up a book. What are they picking up? What are they looking at? Because at the end of the day, that's your audience. And that's who you are illustrating for. And never forget that. I think that's so important. Yeah.
They should have something where they let a bunch of kids loose at London Book Fair and see what they gravitate towards.
Idea. That's a really good idea.
I think covered in glitter.
So I think we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. So sorry, it's relatively brief. But I'm going to hand it over to you guys in the audience. Are there any questions that you would like to ask these wonderful art directors today? I can already see you've got a hand shot up at the back.
Hi, thank you for today. What is usually is there a standard payments arrangement, whether it's a publishing company or an independent author? What do you recommend for illustrators, especially when working with independent authors?
It depends on how much we're commissioning you to do. Sometimes it's piece per piece, sometimes it's a job fee, and then there's a negotiation. So then you'd have to decide how long is that going to take, that piece of artwork going to take you. You know, we look at whether the artwork's done digitally or whether it's actually hand drawn, and obviously we will account for timings on some stuff like that. A lot of stuff that we do, there is a time frame. Obviously, you know, we hope that we get ideas onto the program really quickly, but sometimes that doesn't give us enough time to work really fully with some of the illustrators. So there's a time period too. So I would suggest that you think about your time, think about how much you think your time is worth. Do some research into sort of the state of play of the market at the moment. There are varying levels. Think about where